Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Q&Play, my monthly Q&A series where I answer your questions in a rambly, unscripted format. The first question comes from group 946. What is the Shadowheart appeal? She is boring as all hell. Yeah, maybe if you have garbage taste, disgusting, horrific, banish him to the void, I say! I'm kidding. Obviously. If you like Shadowheart or dislike Shadowheart, that is your personal opinion. But I will say that Shadowheart is my favorite of the Baldur's Gate 3 companions. I wanted to answer this question for a very specific reason because I actually think this is a really interesting subject. Now, for starters, I understand that a lot of people say Shadowheart is popular because, oh, she's an attractive goth girl, that's the only reason, nothing deeper than that. And yeah, I'm sure for a lot of people, that's why they like Shadowheart. And you know what? That's fine. Some people like other people based on how they appear. That's okay. But I will say, as an asexual and aromantic person, that's not exactly what I saw in Shadowheart. My primary reason for loving Shadowheart is because I just think her story is really compelling. I love her Disney princess vibe, and the whole idea of a dark cult taking a literal Disney princess who loves animals and worships a wholesome moon goddess, taking her and trying to make her into a dark, evil witch, and failing to do so. Come on, that's just charming as all hell. I also just love her voice actress. I also like that there's constantly something going on with Shadowheart's quest. In Act 1, you have the mystery of what kind of god she worships, and her randomly finding symbols of Shar and Seluna, and that builds up that intrigue all the more. And in Act 2, oh my god, everything is revealed. Shadowheart is on her full Shar questline. She's in the Shadow Curse, which was created by Shar. And then, of course, the main dungeon is the Gauntlet of Shar, where she shines all the more. And in Act 3, she has arguably one of the best climaxes of all the companions, with a legitimately very difficult fight against Viconia Devere and her army of Sharan worshippers. With a lot of the companions, the amount of content they have kind of dwindles in and out, but with Shadowheart, it's a consistent high, and I really love that. And yeah, I also think she's pretty, though I do think a lot of the companions in Baldur's Gate 3 are pretty, except for Lae'zel. I'm sorry, Lae'zel, I just don't like frogs, it's not my fault! I also, shockingly, don't find Halsin all that attractive as a romantic interest and aesthetically, which is honestly surprising to me because I often compliment very tall men in my life. Maybe I just don't like that much muscle on them. Perhaps I like my men a little thinner. I have not put much thought into it, if I'm being honest, but yeah, there you go. I also love Shadowheart because her romance was the first one I did, and this is what I wanted to talk about because honestly, I think people just don't like companions because they don't interact with them as much. When you do a romance with a companion, you interact with them way more. You get more scenes with them beyond just the two romance scenes. When I'm romancing Shadowheart, I'm talking to her all the time. I build more of a connection. If you were romancing Lae'zel, you would talk to her more often, build more of a connection with that character. Those additional scenes go so far in fleshing out a character. So if you've never done Will's romance, you might find him boring because a lot of the flavor of his character are in those scenes you've never engaged in. At the same time, if you barely interact with Shadowheart, she wouldn't seem that appealing to me. I think Baldur's Gate 3 does a really good job in rewarding people the more they engage with the game. I've talked about this before, but my first playthrough, I didn't even have all the companions with me. I didn't have Gale or Lae'zel at all, and that resulted in my opinion, a much more underwhelming experience. The more you interact with the characters in this game, the better it's going to be. And honestly, I think that applies to D&D just as much. That took a while. Next question from IronLordEXO. How do you handle spell components in your games? Most DMs I've played with just say, yeah, we don't do that here unless it's a high-level spell that specifically consumes a component. But I'm curious about your take on them. I am 99% sure the rules as written state that you only really consume the component if it is worth a gold piece value, and if it's not in the rules, I'm pretty sure that's how most DMs do it. Like, I remember Matt Mercer forcing Ford to go out and find a lightning-struck branch to cast spells from his warlock list, right? However, Matt, me, and many other DMs out there do make clerics consume a diamond for Revivify, for example. There are times where the developers implemented material components specifically as some sort of balancing act. They don't want people endlessly revivifying their companions because death would have no meaning. And in my opinion, even with the gold cost, Revivify is still a very, very potent spell. I do see other DMs take it further, balancing spells like Summon Greater Demon, for example, to require the blood of a humanoid. I mean, in the spell descriptor, it says blood of a humanoid gathered in the past 24 hours. That could be a pretty hefty nerf if you enforce that regularly. It just depends on your DM. For me, I only worry if it's worth a gold piece count. I've said this many times, but my games are pretty hard, and I'd rather the players have access to more tools than less tools, just because it lets them do more cool stuff, and in turn, lets me do more evil stuff upon them. Next, from Spoony Love 19, what made you decide to cosplay femme characters, and why are you so damn good at it? Well, okay, the second question is just a thank you. I don't know if I'm good at it per se, but I am thankful for the compliment. If you are unaware, these questions are under my Shadowheart cosplay, so that's why they mentioned Shadowheart earlier, and that's why they're asking this here. And yeah, I really do enjoy cosplaying feminine characters. Now, as for the why, I think it's because a lot of the feminine characters I've been enjoying recently can be translated into pretty simple outfits. I am not a cosplayer. I am not somebody who can craft. I am thrifting all of these clothes. I'm having my friends help me with my hair. I do my own makeup, but the looks I'm applying are hardly revolutionary. Shadowheart, Amity, Velma, these characters are characters with relatively simple, easy to acquire outfits. When I cosplay men, the principle is largely the same. I already had elves' clothes in my closet. Dutch Vanderlyn only required a little bit of extra sewing work. That was it. I also think I have a pretty feminine face, especially when I put on makeup. I'm not exactly a big, manly looking man. So me cosplaying, I don't know, Thor, just doesn't really translate or come across. When I cosplay women, I just think I pull it off better 99% of the time. Like, there are characters like Elle, where my face does absolutely fit. And for the record, I don't think you should only dress as characters you look like. But my personal preference is that I like getting at least somewhat approximately as close to the character as possible, and that means that often I cosplay more feminine characters, whether they're male or female. As for what's next, I have my eyes on Powder from Arcane, specifically in her prom outfit. I really love the dress, and I already have the jacket, and I think I'd look really cute with that blue hair, so I definitely have my eyes on that, as well as Wednesday Addams, who I have admired my entire life since I was a small child, and frankly, it's high time that I get Wednesday Addams into my lineup of witchy femme outfits. So yeah, both of those are in my head, and who knows which one I'm going to do first. It's a mystery for the future, I guess. Question from LyrinaeSings. Hiya, Crispy. D&D question here. I play TTRPGs for many years with my longtime friends, but I find role-playing character backstories quite difficult. I prefer to make simpler characters and backstories because I know my friends and fellow players love roleplay and deep character stuff. So I kind of take a backseat and enjoy simply being a part of their more intricate stories. As a DM, have you ever had a player like this, and how would/did you feel about it? I think that my entire home game party is like that. My regular D&D game does not have all that many backstories. In fact, none of them sent me basically any backstory material beforehand, besides just like a couple bullet points, and that was okay. My worlds do have complex stories, and my players are perfectly okay to be like a Commander Shepard in that story. Like, Commander Shepard has some backstory notes, but at the end of the day, they are a player proxy to experience the world and the NPCs and blah, 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 blah. My characters are often like that. Now, when I play with the 10th Tomb crew, for example, those guys are giving me a lot more backstory to work with, and therefore, I can kind of let them take the reins a bit more. The session notes for those sessions are much more bare bones because I don't need to do as much heavy lifting. I don't mind either approach. They both have their value. They're both perfectly fine. You having a more minimalistic backstory is not a problem at all unless your DM decides it is for some reason. And honestly, I don't see why that would be the case. Simpler characters can absolutely be very interesting and have a place in a D&D game, even with super complex characters with pages and pages of backstory. You don't need that to be fun. The same goes for roleplay. If you find that nerve-wracking, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. You don't need to work to improve that by any means if you don't want to. Everybody has fun in TTRPGs very differently. And if roleplay and backstory aren't your thing, that's all good. Just make sure that you're enjoying your game, and it seems like you are. Taking a backseat is a very valid middle ground. Question from I'm tired of my continued existence, 6324. Do you think it's possible for a person to be a good DM if they somewhat have a lacking imagination? I think that person might be doing themselves a bit of a disservice, because I do think DMing requires some imagination. However, modules exist. There are plenty of pre-written adventures that you can jump into so that you don't need to bear the creative load of creating your own world or creating your own story. That's why those exist, and there is nothing lesser at all with choosing to use a module rather than choosing to use a homebrew campaign or setting. However, creative skills can be developed. I don't want people to shove themselves in a box and go, I haven't been creative most of my life, therefore I can't be creative ever. Everybody has the capability to learn skills. Writing, creating stories, creating a world around your players, just DMing in general, those are skills that can be taught, and those are skills that can be learned. The imaginative aspects are not something that's intrinsic, right? Matt Mercer didn't emerge from the womb creating Exandria. Matt Colville was not always a talented orator. Everybody learns. So, if you're lacking imagination, no problem. You can start off with a module, start off with a one-shot, something simple. But be aware that you can absolutely grow those skills over time, especially as you practice. Question from Nightly Knight 09. Have you ever had a party get really attached to the big bad evil guy or a villain in the campaign, and they really try to justify not killing them? No. My party just likes killing people. Hey, I'm not complaining. I make villains that are meant to be killed. I like just straight up bad guys, and that's that. If they're meant to be sympathetic, they're gonna be like Yumi from the 10th Tomb, where it's pretty damn obvious that they're sympathetic, and therefore it's not much of a debate on whether or not to save them. Or at least most of the time, but yeah, that's neither here nor there. Point is, nah, not really. My party just likes smoking the villains. Question from IronGoodspeed. How do I spotlight my story-relevant NPCs without having them hog the spotlight, especially when your campaign is set in a specific show's universe and your players keep requesting more of the canon characters as NPCs? So, I've never had a game set in a specific universe, though I do put in plenty of references to stuff my players like, and they enjoy it. Frankly, fan service is perfectly okay in D&D. Hell, I'd say fan service is perfectly okay in, like, a lot of things. But in D&D especially, you're just playing a game. If you service your players, give them a little reward for their dedication to your stuff, put in an Easter egg to their favorite show, they're gonna eat that stuff up, man. My players love it when I do that. As for how to make an NPC relevant without making them the spotlight hog, I always say this, but make sure you remember who the main character is, and more importantly, who has the agency. NPCs should not be solving central conflicts. NPCs should not be solving, in fact, the vast majority of any conflicts. That is the player's job. NPCs can create conflict, incite incidents. Like, for example, Yumi in the 10th Tomb, she is arguably the center of that campaign. She is the MacGuffin, she is the quest giver, but in terms of agency, it is the players who decide what happens. It's also important to remember that when you're spotlighting an NPC, make sure it's an NPC the players actually like. Like, I went through a lot of effort to make sure Yumi was a likable character in the 10th Tomb. In Shadow over Karakonos, Kalia Solfero was the quest giver and damsel of that story. It was really important to make sure that the players actually cared about her, otherwise the story wouldn't really work, and that's why I, directly asked them. I just straight up was like, hey, do you guys like her? And they said yes, and therefore I was good to move on. That's a big part in why Yumi and Kalia were successful in their respective campaigns. The players actually gave a crap. The more characters like an NPC, the more you're going to be able to include them. I actually made a whole Tabletop Tavern tips about this a while back. I'll link in the cards if I remember. Let's be honest, I probably won't. Final question from Sellesion. What does a typical DM planning session look like when you're preparing a game? I want to use things like music and maps for my DM, but the setup seems like it would add a lot of time to my already rigorous flowcharts and stat blocks. Okay, so I used to have a list on my whiteboard, but I have removed it to clear up some space for my world building notes. But anyway, I still have it memorized. The first thing I do is write my notes. My notes normally look like about 1,500 words, which may be a lot, maybe a little to some people. To me, I don't think that's too crazy. It usually only takes me an hour to an hour and a half to write all my notes, and then that's it. I also put in counterbalance in that hour and a half, so in all honesty, for notes, that's all it takes me. After that, I take about 30 minutes to work my maps. Usually, I want at least one combat per session. There are times where combat doesn't happen, but that is a minority, so I usually have a map to upload. Cheipeku honestly makes that really, really easy on me. Then, tokens. Ideally, I already have all the tokens I need for a combat before I even start, but if there's anything I need for that combat, like an NPC token I have to upload, I get that done. That usually doesn't take on all that much time, maybe 5 to 10 minutes. Finally, music and SFX. This can take some time. Sometimes I'll have the music prepared in advance, but usually not, especially for a boss theme. I like having sound cues for pretty much everything, so this is like 30 minutes to an hour of work. And then finally, after all that, I usually have maybe some supplementary materials to work on, a new magic item here or there, but again, usually those are made in advance. I do lots of prep just in my day-to-day life. I write lore in my free time, I create magic items in my free time. All that contributes to me doing less prep. Before a session, I'm usually prepping 2, maybe 3 hours over the course of the week. If you're willing to do that, great. If you're not, I honestly think that's perfectly reasonable. That's how I prep my games, and I usually do it the day of, just so I have it all fresh in my head right when I start. And that is my approach. Your approach may be very different. Honestly, I think the most important part of my approach is grabbing a glass of wine before I start rolling the dice. Like something to relax me. Lighting a candle, setting the vibe, making sure I'm in the mood for playing the game. Because if I'm not in the mood, what's the damn point, you know? But anyway, that is the end of today's episode of Q&Play. I enjoyed it. Hope you guys did too. If you guys did indeed enjoy it, you might enjoy last Friday's episode of RPG Horror Stories. We talked about a dude who thought that all dads were creeps, linked up in the cards. But before you go, please leave a like on this one and subscribe to Crispy's Tavern so you don't miss any of our content as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own questions or thoughts, you can go down in the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment Olympus Calls to let me know you made it to the end of the video and to reference the game I'm playing in the background. But hey, in any case, in essence, like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you all next time. Farewell.